Kurt Hunter built his first marionette at age 12. Ever since then, he's made marionettes his passion, creating several shows he's performed all over the United States with his company Kurt Hunter Marionettes. In addition to teaching and performing at National Puppetry Festivals, he is now on the artistic staff of the O'Neill Puppetry Conference. I talked to Kurt Hunter about his puppetry journey on this episode of Under the Puppet.
You're listening to Saturday Morning Media. And now, back to our show.
Welcome to the show that is preserving puppetry through the personal stories of professional puppeteers. My name is Grant Pachoco, and this is Under the Puppet. Kurt Hunter, welcome to Under the Puppet.
Very, very happy to join you today.
Yes, I'm very excited to talk to you. I think I first saw you perform at the 2019 festival and the National Festival. I believe that's when it was before the world shut down. Right. But was super impressed with your show, and I'm super excited to ask you about that show, but I want to know all about you. So we're going to go back to the beginning. Do you remember your first exposure to puppetry, the first time you saw puppets?
The first exposure, probably not, because there was school assembly shows and Mr. Rogers and Captain Kangaroo and whatnot. But the point of inspiration is very, very clear, because I got to see Tony Urbano's company perform at the Laguna Beach Festival of the Arts when I was in junior high school, when we were on a family vacation out to California. And that set the fire and set the bar for how good puppetry could be. And, that's what I've been aspiring to, for the decades since.
Do you remember what you saw when you saw Tony performing, like specific acts or anything that really captured you?
Oh, yeah, I definitely remember bits and pieces. He had his caricature of Bob Hope in the show, and Bob Hope had recorded the voice, for this marionette routine. It was primarily marionettes, and it was primarily, it was a family-friendly show, but it really was aimed at adults. And there was classical music involved. There were combining of marionettes with other forms of puppetry. A marionette would come out, but the arms might be controlled by rods by someone from behind to get more specific movement in the course of things. Yeah, really, really sophisticated stuff. And, all of us, the family that were there, were just so blown away by it.
Excellent. And where did you grow up?
I grew up in Nebraska, northeastern Nebraska, so very isolated from really any connection to performing arts.
And when you saw this show on your family trip and it captured your attention, when you got back to Nebraska, what did you do? What was the next step? Is it the library or how did you research?
Well, the library was the second to the next step. On that same trip, we made a stop in Tijuana, and I got a little Mexican marionette. So that was the first step. But interlibrary loan was the big thing for the first few years, being able, because our little town of 1,000 people, little library, didn't have anything on puppetry, but they could reach out to other libraries and got some wonderful books there. And I think probably within a year or so of that, I was interested enough that probably through some interlibrary loan book, I discovered the Puppeteers of America and joined as a junior member. And so then I'm getting the magazine coming every other month at that point. So that was my door to the world at that point.
And what did your parents think about all this? Were they creative? Were they supportive of this?
Oh, very, very, very supportive. Yeah, my folks, my dad has always been sort of finding odd little creative niches. After I graduated high school, he got into wood carving, became a marvelous wood carver, but he's always had sort of odd little projects when we installed a Franklin stove, a wood-burning stove in the basement, he had to build the bellows for it and painted a little patriotic scene on it. So that was the kind of thing. And my mom was involved in drama in college, and, if they needed someone to do a reading for a public event, she might get called upon.
So you had a good support base there to support the performing arts or creative endeavors.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I saw a video interview you did where you showed off some of your marionettes, and then you showed off the first marionette you made. back when you were 12. And was that to learn to build that? Was that out of books or how did you find the resources to do that? Or did you just work it out on your own?
That very first marionette, Chester, may have been before I got any library books. That may have been, the one page on puppetry in the encyclopedia that we had at home. Because he's
Right.
made out of like 2 1x2s, very poorly cut, with naga hide for joints, but somehow I managed to rig up a tiny little moving mouth on him, and he was a strangely good dancer. So he was enough of encouraging enough to keep trying.
Right. Well, it's great just because I think of myself at 12 and I was like, I would have no idea how to work out a mouth, let alone stringing it to make a puppet. So it's really impressive. I was when I saw it, I was like, wow, you were 12 when you did this. That's pretty amazing. So was the goal, like even back in junior high, like this is what I want to do, puppets. This is what I want to work on.
I guess I wasn't looking far enough ahead to say what I wanted to do. It was what I wanted to do right then. And so one project led to the next project, and mostly marionettes, but because Jim Henson was pretty much all you could see for puppetry, there was a lot of Henson-style stuff involved in the early shows that I did. The early shows were a mix of kind of marionette variety with kind of Muppet-style variety. Little, not very far removed from Henson kind of influenced stuff.
And were you writing your own shows then? Were you putting your own shows together?
Yeah. So I've always pulled off of my own ideas and written anything that I did myself. Yeah.
And where were you performing these shows?
Boy Scout banquets, county fairs, like lodges. The local, Knights of Columbus or whatever it might be.
Right. And you must have, to get these gigs, you must have people must have enjoyed your performances.
Yeah, and because at that point it was, strictly word of mouth, of course. There was no internet so somehow people were passing the word around that I would get calls to do one thing or another. So
you went to college at Washington University in St. Louis. Was your focus like getting a degree in performing, or did you have other focuses?
So the degree program I was on was split between Nebraska Wesleyan University in Nebraska, in Lincoln, Nebraska,
Okay.
and Washington University in St. Louis. So Nebraska Wesleyan is a liberal arts school, and Washington University I was there for the engineering program. So my first 3 years, I was working on a physics degree, actually.
Wow.
But actually spent more time in the theater department than a lot of the theater majors. I was doing a lot of technical theater, a lot of set stuff and lighting and sound, but I was also in a lot of plays at that point. And I actually even did a summer of summer stock repertory connected with the theater in the middle of my college years before I went on to St. Louis to finish up the engineering portion of. So I've got degrees actually in physics and electrical engineering, but spent a lot of performing arts time at both schools in between.
Yeah. Well, I know definitely in Penguin in My Pocket, that engineering background is going to come up when we discuss that. But it was also during college you started working with Bob Kramer's Marionettes. How did you get hooked up with them?
Well, so Bob Kramer's Marionettes are headquartered in St. Louis, Missouri. So partly through the Puppeters of America Puppetry Guilds. When I was growing up in Nebraska, the Guild of Puppetry was actually all of Nebraska and all of Iowa. So it was a huge, geographic area. And so when I got to St. Louis, I hooked up with the St. Louis Guild of Puppetry, which at that point, they were having all of their meetings at Bob Kramer's Marionette studio. I connected with them, I guess, through a guild meeting, and pretty quickly was performing in Peter and the Wolf at their studio on the weekends. So started off just kind of as a side volunteer performer, and then by the time I was leaving St. Louis with my degree, I was really the third puppeteer after Bob Kramer and Doug Felch. So we did a lot of stuff with them, performing with the St. Louis Symphony, Peter and the Wolf. We did a television special while I was there. Lots of stuff in their studio. So that was really my first connection with, professional performers. And so that was kid in a candy shop time.
Right. Are there any things that you learned from working with Bob and on those different projects, techniques or advice that you still use today?
I'm sure there are. It's hard to pinpoint. I had a decent grasp of marionettes at that point, so I could step into stuff pretty well, but I certainly had never performed as much as I did when I was working with them. And the quality of his marionettes are just incredible. So just hanging out in the shop, I know I picked up lots of bits and pieces. And he was working with scholastic and casting heads. And so there are a lot of construction techniques also that Bob was doing that I've definitely still make use of.
Well, and you hooked up with Bob through the guilds, and you mentioned that you got into the Puppeteers of America, and I want to talk a little bit about your website too, because your website is pretty great. But you also on your website talk about these different guilds and have links to Puppeteers of America. How important do you think it is for puppeteers to hook up with these organizations and to become members?
I personally, I think it's very, very important. That it's great that there are the online resources. You can find videos, you can find a lot of things, a lot of resources online right now. But that just doesn't compare to working with someone face to face and finding people with the same interests. The guilds are the fastest way to connect up with people in most parts of the country.
And do you think it's important for puppeteers when they're just starting out? I don't know. I mean, maybe you would. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Call Bob Kramer a mentor. But do you think it's important when you're starting out, especially in puppetry, to find someone who's doing it that you can kind of hang out with and as you said, like pick up techniques and experiences from?
Absolutely. I mean, you can certainly save yourself a lot of dead ends by seeing how someone else is doing it, and by seeing how as many people are doing stuff as you can, because some people will have this thing figured out but maybe be doing something else. A great builder who writes really lousy shows, and you don't necessarily want to pick up their script skills, but you want to pick up their mechanical skills. So
Right.
The more people you can kind of get in touch with and see their work and pick up bits and pieces along the way, whether it's puppetry or dance or theater, expose yourself to people who are doing things that you find interesting.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. I also wanted to talk about, because you've done a little bit of work with this and you even wrote a book about it, and that's using, and we haven't talked a lot about this on the show, maybe just touched on it here or there, but that's using puppets in ministry. And so when did that start? And and even leading to writing the book about it as well.
Yeah, there's been some little bits of puppet ministry stuff for a long, long time from when I was in Nebraska, just because we were very involved in our church, and Nebraska Wesleyan was a Methodist affiliated school. I guess after I moved to the Twin Cities, up here in Minneapolis, the first thing that I did in a significant way was a program we called Puppet Nativity. It was meant to be an intergenerational project where, from little kids through adults through seniors, built puppets to do a presentation of the Nativity story that was meant to be for a Christmas Eve service. So it moved from small-scale rod puppets for the Holy Family, through Albrecht Drozer-style masks for the shepherds, to large three-pole bread and puppet Heart of the Beast style puppets for the Three Kings. And so it was meant to be just a one-off Christmas Eve service, but we got through this big production and kind of the whole congregation just wanted to continue it, so we ended up doing that as for public presentations for 10 years after that.
Wow.
And in the thick of that, our Christian ed director was moving to a sort of innovative educational theory for our Christian education called, I I think was the Seven Intelligences, but the basic idea is people learn different ways. Some people will sit down in a classroom and have a teacher talk to them and they can pick up stuff fine. Some people are better off if they're physically doing something, they'll retain the material better. And so puppetry was supposed to be part of this program that she was working on. So of course I got pulled in to do that piece. And the first thing that I saw of how they were doing it at another church was moving mouth style stuff. But it was just the head of a moving mouth puppet sitting on the edge of a stage, just reciting lines as someone was trying to read the script. It was, about as bad as you can imagine. So I stayed away from moving mouth stuff completely, because in an hour in a classroom, just wanted to have something with a quick learning curve. The kids could hear the story, perform the story, we'd videotape the story, and then they would see their own performance of the videotaped performance. So we did shadow puppets and we did object theater, and we did a style of rod puppet called handle bag puppets, which George Latshaw had developed, which I'd learned from him through a puppetry festival as well. So once we were doing this and I was doing something other than just moving mouth puppetry, we ended up doing some national conventions explaining how we were doing the puppetry piece of this. And then this Lutheran publishing house in the Twin Cities approached me because they were doing a series of books about this new approach to Sunday school and had me write the puppetry book for that series.
Were you, you're doing puppetry and you're performing all the time. Was there any apprehension now I have to put this into a book, or did the book come easy and you were able to knock it out?
It came pretty easily because I think partly because I'd already been teaching workshops on this stuff. So I'd already been kind of packaging up the ideas in a way that I could hand off to other people, in an hour or two of workshop sessions. So the same stuff I was doing in workshops is really what became the book.
Excellent. I would love to know, when did you decide, was there any sort of event, or at what point did you say, I need to start this as a business, Hunter Marionettes as a business? Was there any sort of inciting event that made that happen?
It started from those early shows in Nebraska. I think the very first payment I got was a pizza place gift certificate for hauling the cardboard box out to some country school. Yeah, so it really just evolved. Once people started paying me, I started taking it more seriously, and business cards and flyers and whatnot. And I guess even now I've neglected the marketing end of this, even now. That's something I need to put more time into. But yeah, it's just been really organic.
And was it, because I just know, and I'm speaking from myself, I like creating things, I like coming up with things, but then when you sit down and you're like, oh, you got to do taxes and you got to do all this business stuff. Did that come, was that easy for you, or do you have somebody else handle all that stuff when you just focus on the creative? How do you work that aspect of it?
I've done a lot of that for myself through the years, although my wife has a very structured business mind as well. So she's set up the database where she keeps contracts and those details. And so between the two of us, but Kathy has picked up an awful lot of the business end of things.
Yeah, I was going to ask about Kathy too, because, she's listed on your page as being part of the business. What's it like working with her, and is she sort of behind you? She's your wife, so of course she supports you, but is she if you're oh, I have this idea to do this, is she right there helping you, make it a reality?
Yes, absolutely she is. It's kind of funny, her artistic strengths line up very well with my artistic weaknesses. She's an incredible seamstress, fabric artist, fiber artist. So, I did my own sewing for years and years, but I've got no clue what's going on compared to what she can do. She's one of those people who, for a good chunk of her life was making all of her own clothing, that kind of a person. And she also has a marvelous eye for color, and she's a fabulous fabulous painter. She learned that. Her mom used to teach painting as well. So the painting of stuff is Kathy's work. Any fabric work you see on the stage, on the puppets, is, if it's sewn on, it's absolutely Kathy's work. And she's also a marvelous musician, so she supports me in lots and lots of ways. And she'll also say that she's my roadie, because when we're out doing shows, she's the one running the sound and doing those kinds of things as well.
Yeah, it's great to have that support. I have a little bit of that going on here as well. So it's good to know someone you can trust to run all that stuff for you.
Absolutely.
Well, how did you, and we don't need to get into specifics if you don't want to, but, I always think it's a complicated thing, especially for creative people, about how much to charge for your services. So I would love to know kind of how you approach that and how you decide what to charge for your shows and workshops and what else.
For the most part, what I try to do is get a sense of, what the going rate, what the local market is for whatever service you're trying to provide, by networking with other puppeteers and getting a sense. And some puppeteers will have fees published on websites and whatnot so that's pretty much what I've tried to do through the years, is just kind of gauge myself on what other people seem to be doing.
What sort of venues do you perform in? Is it libraries? Is it schools? Is it festivals? Where's your kind of bread and butter when you're out performing these shows?
Yeah, libraries, occasionally schools, festivals, absolutely, museums. It's a real wide range of stuff where what I do happens to fit.
And where would you say you get most of your bookings from? Is it, the website, or is it word of mouth, or is it, friend of a friend who recommends you? Where do you think most of your bookings come from?
At this point, I think it is friend of a friend, word of mouth, friend of a friend. And I need to start doing more reaching out, because, for instance, the sort of venues that I think Penguin in My Pocket would be a good fit for are not venues that I'll reach by word of mouth. And so those are I need to be doing more intentional marketing, more direct contact with some, performing arts places where that would be a good fit, which I haven't really done up to this point. And now that we're crawling our way out of COVID, it's the time to be doing that.
Yeah, yeah. And, I know out here in California, there are sort of like library entertainment festivals, like booking type thing. Have you done those before? Have you done those kind of?
I have done those in the past. I haven't done those recently, and I probably should, to get back on that radar some more, because library stuff especially dropped off completely, through the last 2 years, and I'd like to be getting back into that and haven't yet.
What advice do you have to younger puppeteers who are looking to book that first gig or looking to book regular gigs?
Look at where stuff that's similar to what you're doing is currently being performed. Figure out, whether it is just making a trip to the local library and saying, this is what I do. I'd love to do something for your summer program. How do I get into that? Yeah, see what's around you and make those direct contacts.
Excellent. Well, in addition to shows on your website, you offer other services such as detangling marionette strings or puppet repair. But I also thought this was great that you offer sort of consulting on not only puppet design, but sort of puppet stage design and more. So tell us a little bit about those services that you offer to people.
Yeah, and that's another thing that's been kind of organic. There's a lot of puppetry in the Twin Cities, has been for a long, long time. So for years, I'd get calls where, in particular, someone wants to make a marionette or is halfway through making a marionette, or worst case scenario, thinks they've made a marionette and they just have to put the strings on it. If you didn't plan for the strings ahead of time, you probably haven't made a marionette. and so just over time, and that's more word of mouth too. People know what I can do. Oh, this is a mechanical thing. Why don't you give Kurt a call? He can help figure that out. And a lot of it has been, just helping out other puppeteers. But as time goes on, people will contact me, here's a marionette that I got in Italy 15 years ago. It means a lot to the family, but this came apart, and can you fix it for us? Or I think this is horribly tangled, and there's no way this can be survived. And, they show up and I send them away with an untangled marionette 5 minutes after they get to my house, because it's usually not as complicated as they think, or it's not as complicated for me as because I've been down this road.
Right.
So now it's to the point where I spent a couple of months earlier this year designing and building a puppet stage for a library in Minnesota because of connections to a puppeteer librarian there. And so that was actually a fairly big, essentially a commercial project, as compared to, I can do this in an evening, come on over and we'll get this figured out.
And I think it's a great lesson too, where, you said it just sort of happened like word of mouth. People would come to you and ask for you, ask advice and stuff. And I think it's such a great lesson of, like, if people keep asking you these things, you're like, oh, maybe I could charge for this. Not like you're being a greedy thing, but it's like people are coming asking me, I have this expertise I can offer to people, and now I'm going to put it up on my website. So maybe people who aren't friends of our friends or just surfing the web, they can get that help too that they need.
Yeah, and it's funny because since I've had that on the website, I get a surprising number of inquiries about marionette repairs or restringing or whatnot. And it used to just be in the Twin Cities. Now that's coming around nationally.
Yeah, and are you like, do you have people sending you marionettes from across the United States?
Yes, to a certain extent. What I do is strictly repairs and restringing. If they really want a restoration, then I pass them off to Kevin Menegas. But, if you need stuff untangled and this is broken, and yeah, absolutely, what people are wanting to pay to get a marionette restrung, and the cost, now of shipping something and then shipping it back, it gets pretty pricey pretty quickly.
Yeah. Well, your website is fantastic. Did you put your website together yourself, or did you have someone help you put that together?
That's strictly me.
Oh, great. Well, I love it because, all the information is there. It's there's booking information, there's video clips, there's a section on puppet resources, which I think is great, and a section on the ministry. But I think my favorite section of the website, and you probably know I'm going to ask this, is puppet recipes. And I would just love, it's such a fun little section of your website, and I would love to know what made you decide to put that up there.
That's actually been on my website for a few iterations, so that's been around for a long time. I'm a collector of puppetry books, and, so all these odd little connections, and down to the point of I found celebrity cookbooks, like Tony Sarg, the father of American puppetry, had an entry in this celebrity cookbook from, somewhere in the early 1900s. And I found another celebrity cookbook where Bill Baird had something, and I think maybe Sherry Lewis had something in there. And so that just seemed like a fun, silly thing to add to the website. And I think there's a reference to George Latshaw's recommendations for pie crust in there too.
Right. Well, it's interesting because in the early days of podcasting, I did a lot of podcasting stuff, and you're trying to get people to your website. And I think this recipe thing is such a great promotional thing, because when I started out doing podcasts, I was also doing a little music work. And I read this thing in a magazine where this one of the tips was create a page of your website that lists all the equipment that you use, because that page will get indexed, and somebody searching for that equipment will find, that web page, and then they will find you through searching through that web page. And I think it's interesting to put, these recipes. I don't know who's searching for Tony Sarg's recipes, but somebody may be looking for celebrity recipes, and it'll come up in a search, and then they found your web page. So I think it's unique. I think it's a great thing to do, is kind of have these oddball pages of your website where maybe people wouldn't think that you would have that on your website, but somebody may find that page first and then discover your whole website.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I wanted to talk about a few of the shows that you've done. You've done a lot of different things, but I wanted to touch on a few of them. And the first one I want to talk about is Sock Puppet Serenade, because this received an Unima USA Citation of Excellence. So can you tell us a little bit about that show and how it developed? And would love to know more about it.
Sure, absolutely. So Sock Puppet Serenade was originally put together as a show for the Minnesota Fringe Festival. I'd been a fan of the work of the Fringe Festival for a bunch of years, and in the back of my head was wondering about kind of packaging some of my stuff together, the little vignettes and things that I've done as a show aimed at an adult audience. So the title character of Sock Puppet Serenade is a marionette that it was a little challenge to myself, another little oddball thing, where I wanted to build a marionette head that looked like it was a hand in a sock puppet, that could make those weird, very specific kind of movements of a sock puppet mouth. And so with, carefully placed weights and foam and whatnot, managed to come up with a mouth that could move in an interesting way. So then the first time that Philip Hubert taught the marionette manipulation strand at the O'Neill Puppetry Conference, it was like, oh, I've got to take that. I've got to study with Philip. What can I bring? I'll put a body on this sock puppet head. So the sock puppet marionette was a hit at the O'Neill that year. And so that was sort of, and I had a few other things that were more experimental works that weren't really traditional marionette stuff. So I wanted to structure the show so that it kind of moved from very traditional marionette vignettes into sort of my forays into experimental marionette stuff. So I put together a master of ceremonies to essentially explain enough about marionettes to the audience so that they could follow along on that trip. So Wendell, it's a live voice marionette character, was created specifically for the Fringe Festival. As it lucked out, like a month before I did the Fringe Festival, I had the opportunity to work with Philip again at Puppet Fest Midwest, and he helped play with this character and kind of find some of the fun things that it would do. So Wendell made his first appearance at Puppet Fest Midwest at the little show and tell at the end of the week before he became the master of ceremonies for my Fringe Festival show. And marionettes are something the Fringe Festival had never seen before, and the show went over like gangbusters. So great reception. And so I then was able to perform it at a Puppeteers of America festival a few years later, and the Unum citation came out of that.
Yeah, well, that's got to be, it's an Unum citation is sort of like the ultimate recognition from peers. It's got to feel really good to get that sort of recognition for the show.
Oh, absolutely. And to this experimental work that I'm really just doing to amuse myself, for it to connect with a general public audiences at the Fringe, and then to connect more specifically with other puppeteers. Yeah, I couldn't ask for more.
Yeah. Well, and the other show that I mentioned earlier, and this was the show that I first saw, or that I saw you perform and was just blown away, is Penguin in My Pocket. And, this one also received recognition in the form of a Jim Henson Foundation grant. But the amazing thing about this show, and spoiler alert to anyone who hasn't seen this show, is that the entire show, marionettes and all, fits inside of an overcoat. And so where did the idea for this come, and how long did this take to develop? Because I imagine it went through many, I would assume, iterations, but maybe it didn't.
Yeah, it took a few years to pull that one together. It started off with the idea, with just the issue that marionettes are difficult to tour with. You've got to bring in all the staging and all of this other stuff, and you got all this setup time. And so I had this crazy idea of, well, if the stage itself could be all fit into one trunk, if I can build a stage that actually builds off of a trunk, and then if I have the marionettes just in the pockets of a coat, then my theory was I can show up at a venue with practically no setup and bring out the trunk, put on the coat. And so I did a first iteration of the show at Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mask Theater in Minneapolis, a real workshop version, where I had purchased a 4X lab coat that I sewed marionette bags into so the marionettes could fit in there. And in that iteration of the show, the stage parts were all actually in the trunk on stage when the show started. And that workshop production was enough to send a video to the Jim Henson Foundation to get the grant to continue with the production. Early on as I was developing the show, I pulled in Paul Mesner from Kansas City, who who grew up in Nebraska, who I'd known for years and years. And we brought him up from Kansas City to the Twin Cities for a long weekend as a creative consultant to work with the director and I as we were starting to flesh out the show. And at that point, we had the coat, we had the marionettes in the coat, we were figuring out the dramatic arc of the story and all of that. And Paul kept circling back to, there's got to be more we can do with the coat. There's got to be more we can do with the coat. And so a few weeks after Paul had been up here, the light bulb finally went on. If the marionettes fit in the coat, if the stage pieces are all sized that they can fit in this, 2 foot by 18-inch trunk, can the stage fit in the coat? And the coat was actually already being built. Our costume designer was in process on the coat. And so it's like, okay, hold things. Let's see if we can rework the coat so that the whole stage can fit in there. And, and everything kind of fell in place from there.
Yeah, it was so much fun to watch. Just you set up this entire stage and then bring out the puppets and do this whole show out of your coat. And I love that it was sort of, because I've done a few library shows in the past, not with puppets, but it's just that thing of like, oh, I got to make another trip to the car to bring in, this,
yes,
the PA system or, whatever it is. And just funny, it's like, how can I make this easier? And it's just a fantastic show, and if it's playing, I recommend people go check it out. The other thing I wanted to ask is a big part of this show is live music, and you play a concertina in the show as well. Have you played instruments for a long time, or was this something you picked up just for this show?
Well, my instrumental music history goes back to 9 years of playing tuba from late elementary school through high school. So it doesn't translate very well to concertina. The concertina is another weird little puppetry festival thing. I was at a puppetry festival in Seattle, I think it was, and they had a raffle going on, and like the grand prize was this little concertina. And so I put in bought my tickets and put them in, and in the back of my head, I was like, okay, if I win this concertina, that will be the universe saying, you need to use concertina in a show somehow, some way. I played around with the concertina for several years, but essentially what I do in that show is just learned very specifically for that show. I really don't play concertina, but between my wife's musical background and then a friend of ours who composed the song for the show, my wife did the arranging to see how it would fit with the chords on the concertina. One of the conceits of this show was to do a show that had no pre-recorded anything. And that's completely different. Penguin in My Pocket was a real stretch for me because I don't do story shows. I don't do character voices. What I've primarily done is very carefully choreographed stuff with marionettes to pre-recorded music. So the concertina, I wanted the concertina because I did want a live music element, but I didn't want pre-recorded. So then between getting the audience to sing and singing in character voices and whatnot throughout the show, it supports the show pretty well.
Yeah, I think it's fun, and it's a great way to get the audience involved. Do you think that going forward in future shows you will do more of this style, or are you going to go back to the pre-recorded stuff, or have you embraced this like character voices and live music aspect?
Well, at least the next stuff that I've got in the drawing board is I want the next show I want to create actually is swinging the pendulum back in the other direction, because I want to do a show that's entirely nonverbal. Some of the more abstract marionette stuff, but with probably a character or two that kind of ground things in a little more of a human world, and that really take a character through a journey. Because what I've done up to this point has really been with marionettes has been, okay, here's a 3-minute vignette, here's an 8-minute vignette, and then putting pieces together for a larger show. And the next thing I want to do is really a show that's crafted beginning to end of elements of marionette vignette, but more of following the journey of a specific character.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to that. How long have you been working on that? And do you have sort of a goal, like, I want to get it done by this so I can perform it here?
I don't have a specific goal. And at this point, I've really been gathering ideas. I've got pages and pages of stuff, and now it's just been a very busy year, and I've just to the point where other obligations are freeing me up enough that I can get into the shop and start mocking up some stuff and start working through some stuff, because this will definitely be a show where I need to get stuff up on its feet before I can really see where it's going.
Excellent. Well, we look forward to that. There's two other pieces I wanted to talk to you about because these were clips that I saw on your YouTube channel. And one is Clown Shirt. Because it's just such a fun piece. And you, again, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't seen it, but you start the piece by coming out with just a shirt on the hanger and kind of showing how it moves. And then you do this great sort of transition where you go behind the stage and then it comes out as a marionette. Is that how that show developed, or that piece developed, was kind of seeing how a shirt moves on a hanger and like, how could I make this work?
That's exactly how that piece developed.
Yeah.
It strictly came from where we've done the laundry and we're hanging up stuff and it's on the hanger. And as I started out with marionettes because I was good at mechanical things and I liked building things. But at this point, I'm mostly just fascinated with movement. And so just how a shirt was moving on a hanger, it's like, oh, that's almost as if he's got a gait going on. And so that was the starting point for that was, okay, well, there's some really interesting movement possible in here. Where can I go with that? Constructing the marionette. There are always little, odd little technical things behind the scenes that you don't realize on a piece that looks super simple like that. It's a clown shirt. It's a dress shirt, like a business dress shirt with a clown nose kind of where the collar is. But how to flesh out the shirt, how to have enough weight in the shirt that it could move. There were a lot of little technical things there. But that's been a piece that's been so much fun to perform, because the more I perform it, the more I discover what the character can do, and a lot of things become much more automatic in terms of all of the little bits and pieces that he performs in that 8 or 10 minute piece.
Yeah, I love the way the puppet moves, and I love his hands. Which are just sort of like the cuffs of the sleeves.
Yeah.
And just when he goes over to the box and he just sort of, they're just hands. It's like, it's so great. I watched that 2 or 3 times because it's such a great piece. And the other one that I just thought was fascinating was, and I don't know if this is the official name of it, but the video you have where it's basically just pieces of paper that form a marionette, just like kind of rolled paper, and he's trying to jump over a fence, and it's so simple but so complex. You know what I mean? Like, it's, I'll put a link in the show notes so people can check it out. But yeah, that's another one. Was that just you fooling around with paper shapes and how can I make a paper into a marionette?
Yeah, it started off with playing around with non-traditional materials. Traditionally marionettes have, very specific rigid joints. And paper has got this wonderful flexibility to it that's got more cartoon movement, especially kind of the way early cartoons moved. And just seeing how I could play with that kind of, how to work with that kind of movement. So that piece was put together for a series of new works that was done by Open Eye Figure Theater in the Twin Cities. So I had 2 or 3 little vignettes like that I put together. But it's interesting. I guess like a year ago when I was teaching at the O'Neill, someone raised some questions about that piece. And I've realized, kind of connecting the dots, it's like, oh, okay, I built this paper thing. And the next thing I did was this thing with nylon strapping. And then actually the monkey's legs in Penguin in My Pocket do not have any traditional joints in them. They've got the same kind of movement that paper does in the piece that you were just referring to. So one little exploration, leads me down the road to something else. But that's still the kind of thing that I want to do more of, is playing with non-traditional materials and, getting different movement out of a marionette than you can with some of the traditional stuff. That's what I find especially exciting.
Yeah. Well, going off of that, you have a lot of marionettes that can do sort of fun and unexpected things that maybe audiences don't think they do, like balance things on their noses or blow up balloons. What are some of your favorite skills or tricks that you've given your puppets over the years?
I've got an ostrich that blows up a balloon, which is, blowing up a balloon is a very traditional marionette routine. But the ostrich has got a lot of fun bits and pieces to it. One, it's a big, oddly shaped character that, is not physically, the little humanoid that a lot of marionettes are, but it's an ostrich that wants to fly, and so there's flapping of the big silly wings involved, and it's got facial animation, and it's got these huge shoes that when it does eventually fly, the shoes have to come off. So little special tricks in there to make all of that stuff happen. So that's a piece that's always fun to get in front of an audience.
And do you have a trick that you really want to figure out that you haven't just quite figured out yet? Like, oh, I really wish I had a marionette that could do this, and I just got to figure out how to do it.
I'm not on that road so much anymore.
Okay.
I wanted to do a stilt walking marionette that did not. The standard for a stilt walking marionette is that you've got poles, of some kind of rods that come up from the marionette. So you're actually operating it by rods, not by strings. And I wanted to do an all string stilt walking marionette, and never got the kind of the placement of the weights, the placement of the weight in the stilts to work for that. So that was something that I was on the road. But right now I'm more interested in exploring things and seeing where it takes me rather than having a specific destination in mind.
Right. Yeah, well, that makes sense. How long does it usually take you, like, I'm sure people ask you this all the time, but how long does it take you to build one of your marionettes from sort of concept to maybe some mock-ups to its final form?
A few months. If it does require some mock-ups, if there's some things mechanically that are different, then if there's facial animation, it takes a bit longer. But if it's a kind of a traditional-ish marionette, from the time I get started to time I've got something ready to perform, might be 4, might be 6 months.
Wow. Yeah. So it's a commitment.
And that's not working on it consistently. That's you work on something and you step away from it and you have to think about it for a while and come back to it, sort of process.
Yeah. Well, you talked about using sort of non-traditional things. We talked about the shirt and the paper. You did a commercial for Target for Toy Story where you had to make marionettes out of just toys that were available in the store. So I would love to know how that came about, and because a lot of times in commercials too, you don't have a lot of time, to get things done. So I would love to know about that process.
Yeah, it was really an interesting project. I get Gordon Smuter, a local puppeteer here, had been approached about the puppetry for the commercial because the movie is CGI. They didn't want to use CGI to represent the toys in the commercial. They wanted the physical toys to be manipulated some way as puppets. And after Gordon looked a little bit at what they were wanting, he thought, oh, this is going to need to be marionettes because these are full figures they want to be seen. So I got pulled into one of the early production meetings and completely agreed that marionettes was the way to go. So then it becomes a matter of, well, there was some sort of deconstructing of the toys to get them. Buzz Lightyear in particular, was not a flexible toy that could be easily turned into a marionette. Gordon did some of the work on that. Whereas like Buzz, he's a rag doll to begin with. So I could work with that. And then it was really a matter of very careful string placement, lots of iterations of just tweaking things little ways. And Bullseye in particular, but the horse.
Yeah, Woody's horse.
Woody's horse was a really fun challenge. Dug out my old VHS copy of Toy Story 2 and really carefully, watched how Woody was trotting. And I was really happy with how close I came to the actual animation, particularly with the horse.
Yeah,
Bullseye, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's just a funny thing. It's like in the world of the thing, they were marionettes and then they were toys, and now you're making them marionettes again. You're making the toys marionettes.
Right.
So it's a fun circle to go. Well, I remember seeing that commercial when it was on. It was just a super fun commercial. You have mentioned the O'Neill Puppetry Conference a couple times, and you are on the staff there now for the marionette strand. But I would love to know, when was the first time? Was it the first time you went to the O'Neill for Philip Huber, or was it before that you had gone to the O'Neill?
My very first time at the O'Neill was to work with Albrecht Roser, the German marionette master. It was an early year of the O'Neill, like I think '94 was the year, and we were working on presenting Stravinsky's A Soldier's Tale with hand-manipulated masks with a paper fold technique that Albrecht had originated. And Bernd Ogrodnik was in the group working with Albrecht that year, Stephen Wiederman. Jennifer Barnhart was our stage manager, actually doing the voices for Soldier's Tale. Just an incredible experience. I was so completely blown away. So blown away that I don't think I slept the whole week, and I had absolutely no timing by the end of the week when we went to perform. But I was amazed by the O'Neill, and my admiration for the whole conference has continued through the years. So that was my first time. Then studying with Philip was, I think, in 2000. Then I think it was the next year I worked with Marty Robinson in Puppet Anarchy. A few years later, I worked with Alice Gottschalk in a production from Germany that she was working on there. And then after that year, I just got it in my head, something that I would dearly love to do is assist Philip Huber at the O'Neill Conference. And at that point, I'd worked with Philip. I'd run follow spot for him at several festivals, and I have gotten to know him, studying with him a couple of times. So I just put it out there to Pam Arciero, the artistic director. I have no idea if there's a need for this, but it would be my dream to assist Philip Huber at the O'Neill Conference. So I applied for a job that didn't exist and was accepted. So Pam said, yeah, sure. Show up and we'll house you and feed you and we'll see how it goes. And so I was assisting Philip and sort of in a sideways sort of way, assisting Jim Rose indirectly on the marionette construction strand, just because the marionette performance strand is sort of very front-loaded. We're adjusting stringing, we're adjusting jointing on the marionettes. But by the end of the week, the marionette performance strand, they're just in rehearsal mode. And so then I had time to be helping folks in Jim's class, as they're finishing up jointing and finishing up stringing and whatnot. And so after doing that for a few years, Jim Rose asked me if I could take over what he does at the O'Neill eventually, which was completely out of the blue to me. And, I had this ideal job of assisting Philip, but I love to teach, and the possibility of being on staff at the O'Neill was amazing. And it wasn't something that Jim was planning to teach the next year. As it turned out, he couldn't be there the next year because his wife Judy had emergency surgery 2 weeks before the conference, and so I ended up leading the marionette construction strand that year. The next year, Jim was planning on leading the marionette construction strand. That was the first year of COVID. So somehow, in some haze we were in, we decided that it made sense to try to do marionette construction online. And so Jim created the kits for the marionettes that he usually did, but he had me run the marionette instruction via Zoom. And as it worked out, Jim was able to sit at his computer and look over the shoulders of everybody building their marionettes that week as I, oh no, that hole needs to be over 1/4 of an inch for this to work, kind of thing. So that went beautifully, and that was kind of the passing of the baton from Jim to me, because unfortunately, the next year we were expecting to be in person, but Jim passed away from COVID before we even got to the next O'Neill conference. So I led the next one online by myself, and then this past year we were in person for the first time, and so I led it strictly on my own this past June.
Well, it's the O'Neill. I mean, we've talked about it on here before. The O'Neill is a really magical place, and I think your experience the first year of not sleeping is typical of going to the O'Neill. But having gone to the O'Neill so many times, do you still learn new things every time that you attend?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Honestly, so much of how I approach puppetry now is from the various years at the O'Neill. So many threads go back. Penguin in My Pocket wouldn't have been possible if I hadn't taken several years of improv classes within the last 6-7 years. And that strictly came out of master classes with Tyler Bunch and Leslie Carrera Rudolph at the O'Neill that, pushed me in the direction of, yeah, that's a skill I need. I need to have that in my tool belt to be able to move forward. The way I look at how new work is created, what are you giving to the audience? Are you giving enough to the audience that they understand the journey you're trying to take them on? So much, sort of my core principles of puppetry have come from the O'Neill, and absolutely there's so many people trying so many new things every year at the O'Neill. There's always gems to take away.
Yeah. I highly recommend it. And every puppeteer should definitely try and make it out there. What is your advice for someone who wants to begin working with marionettes, but they're total beginner and they're just intimidated by how complex they appear? Because I will say that was me the first time at the O'Neill. Seeing the marionettes, someone was like, "Here, hold a marionette," and I was like, "No, thank you." So, what advice do you have to someone who is just beginning?
Sure. Well, the first thing I'll say is marionettes don't have to be complicated. I had the opportunity to study with Albrecht Roser at the University of Connecticut, but before I worked with Philip at the O'Neill, so it was somewhere in the late 90s, and every day at that 2-week master class, we started with a ball on a string, a wooden ball, one string, and just to discover what they could do. And at the end of 2 weeks, we all did performances with full-figured marionettes, Albrecht's actual, carved wooden gorgeous marionettes, stuff that we had made, but everybody had to perform in a piece that was ball on string. And so they became soldiers, they became mother and child, they became all these different characters because you define what it is by what you do with it. And so my advice is, and until you can work with someone and get a little bit of training and get a little bit, start super simple with marionettes, a string or two. Just explore. When I teach marionette, I don't call it manipulation anymore. I call it exploring movement. I start with simple things, 1-2 strings. Just figure out how it moves and what emotion you're seeing from how that object is moving, and what can you build from there. So that's my little bit of recommendation.
Yeah, that's a ball on a string is much less intimidating to me than picking up full figure.
When you hand someone a musical instrument, you don't start them with a pipe organ.
Right. Well, as we wind down here, I did wanted to ask the question I always love to ask at the very end of the interview is, what has been the highlight of your puppetry career so far?
Probably the reception I've got for performing for my peers. Penguin in My Pocket, the show you saw at the festival in 19, that was such a wonderful reception. The audience was so, when an audience is just so with you, in a performance, that's just a dream. And when it's your peers that you've got that kind of connection with. And when I did Sock Puppet Serenade at the earlier festival, it was a similar thing where they're just right where you want the audience to be. And when that's your peers, you've gotten where you were trying to get to.
Well, it was Penguin in My Pocket was such an amazing performance. And the other thing I loved about it, and this is a testament to you as a performer, is that the theater that was in is sort of a bigger theater.
Yeah.
And this show, on the surface you might think, oh, this is a conference room in a library type of show.
I wouldn't have booked me into that space.
But you captured everybody, and especially, and this is for performers of all whatever you're doing. It could be music or comedy or whatever. To have the audience sort of spread out like that is not always the best thing you want, but you captured everybody, and you had everybody singing along, and it was such a great performance. And Kurt, I just thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Oh, this has been a delight. Thank you so much.
My thanks to Kurt Hunter for being on the show. For links to some of Kurt's work, as well as to some of the things we discussed, check out the show notes for episode number 75 over at underthepuppet.com. And if you'd like to hear even more of my talk with Kurt Hunter, download the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android and click on the gift icon in the listing for this episode. Well, now it's time to announce the winner of episode 74's giveaway for a $50 gift card to puppetpelts.com. The question was, what objects did Haley say Grampy was juggling in season 1 of Don Quixote that was all shot in camera with no after effects? And the answer was coconuts. And the winner is Jeff Peterson. Congratulations, Jeff. Your gift card to puppetpelts.com is on the way. Well, now it's time for this episode's giveaway, and it is for a brand new Jim Henson Company baseball cap. This one-size-fits-all baseball cap is only available at the Jim Henson Company lot and is embroidered with the Jim Henson Company logo. To be entered to win, simply answer this question from the episode you just heard. What name did Kurt Hunter give his very first marionette? When you find the answer, send it in an email to underthepuppet@gmail.com with the subject line giveaway, and you'll be entered to win. All entries for this giveaway must be received by September 15th, 2022, and only one entry per household. And, unfortunately, due to recent issues shipping the prizes to winners in other countries, these giveaways are now only open to those listeners with a mailing address in the United States of America. The winner will be chosen at random from all correct entries and be announced on the October 2022 episode of the show. Good luck! I want to send a special thank you out to all the Saturday Morning Media Patreon patrons, including Kurt Hunter, who helped make this show possible. Patreon patrons at the producer level and above who get a special shout out are Vicky Sebring, David Akers, Tony Urbano, Kathy Crawford, Eve Cunning, and my great aunt Dorothy Bachoco. To become a patron, visit patreon.com/Saturday Morning Media. And thank you for your support. Well, that's going to do it for this episode of Under the Puppet. If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback about the show, call our voicemail line at 818-806-9604 or click the Call the Show button in the free Under the Puppet app for iOS and Android. You can also send them via email to underthepuppet@gmail.com, or you can connect with the show on Instagram or Twitter by searching for Under the Puppet. And don't forget to tell a friend about the show. Thank you so much for listening. This episode of Under the Puppet was edited by Steven Staver and featured music by Dan Rank. Help spread the word about the show by sharing your favorite Under the Puppet episode with a friend. Under the Puppet is copyright 2022 Saturday Morning Media, Grandpa Choco executive producer, all rights reserved. www.saturdaymorningmedia.com. Under the Puppet proudly presents The Adventures of Timmy the Tooth Reunion. In this almost 90-minute video, you will hear great stories from the cast and crew who brought this amazing puppet show to life. Plus, you'll see never-before-seen artwork and exclusive behind-the-scenes video. Under the Puppet's Timmy the Tooth Reunion is available right now at timmy.underthepuppet.com.
You've been listening to Saturday Morning Media. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.